I mean, crikey, you look at the classic Orwellian use of names for organizations to give the impression that it's the opposite of what it really is. I mean, for goodness sake, we're talking here about George Soros's Open Society Institute, which is the last thing the Open Society Institute actually wants. So when you look at things like Muslim brotherhoods, and look at almost any organization that has democracy in it, and you're looking at an organization that wants to take democracy away, and just because it's called the Muslim Brotherhood does not mean that at its core it has even the best interests of Muslims at heart. You know, I was talking to people who've been involved professionally in politics and intelligence and all the rest of it.
David, stay there. Long segment coming up. That was a short segment. We'll continue there with the Muslim Brotherhood. And now if we're in the first scene in the first act of the play, what the full play is. If you are receiving this transmission, you are the resistance. And you resist by unlocking your mind, studying how the globalist engineer society, the priest class, how they manipulate, by becoming aware of this in life, your family, in business, in everything. Your knowledge and your success will only increase. The New World Order does everything they can to suppress human potential, the human mind, and knowledge, because the people perish for lack of knowledge. The people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, as the good book tells us. David Icke, as we went to break, you were starting to get into the first scene in the first act for the New World Order, the global destabilization program, people rioting and protesting in Greece, in Ireland. At the Davos, Switzerland meeting last week, they called for 100 trillion in additional taxpayer money to the private banks, an open announcement of world government, all of that smoke screened by what's happening now. David Icke, please continue.
Yeah, I was just finishing off a point, Alex, about the fact that just because something's called something doesn't mean that's what it represents and that's what it stands for, including the Muslim Brotherhood. There's a lot of organizations in the Arab world that actually are fronts for Israel and the United States. Andreas von Bülow, I think you've talked to him yourself over the years, former German minister and an expert in intelligence, especially German intelligence in that whole area.
Andreas von Bülow.
Yeah, I talked to him on the phone for a long time, years ago. Not long after 9/11, and he was saying he knew for a fact that Abu Nidal, of course the infamous Arab terrorist, was actually an asset of Mossad. That's how it works.
Yeah, he was the former head of German intelligence, yeah, and the former German defense minister. And he talked about the white supremacists are run by the globalists, the radical Muslims are run by them, the radical black groups, the radical Hispanic groups. All of these groups are there so the government can play the part of the savior.
Yeah, and of course we know the classic stands out like the proverbial is Bin Laden, Osama Bin Laden. We know that he was a front man for the same group. So when we see these names that appear to represent Muslims or appear to represent this or that or the other, we have to just again, streetwise, shades of grey, just take a step back and let's see if they really do that. And again, we come back to the classic line, really, by their actions shall they be judged. That's what we need to do, not by what they say, but what they do. Another interesting thing, Alex, you know, is that there is this whole deal about what's known as Greater Israel, which is the area that the Israel extremists claim is theirs, the real Israel. And it's interesting, when you look at the map of it, it includes, of course, Israel, Palestine that we see now, but it also includes a great chunk of Egypt going across to Cairo. It includes Jordan, it includes Lebanon, it includes Syria, it includes Iraq, it includes a great chunk of Saudi Arabia. Now, what we're looking at here, as you look at that map, are all the countries, or many of the countries, that are actually now in possible line for this domino effect that Kissinger was indicating with his quote. And there is an agenda playing out here. And when we look at what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Britain beginning to, what's happening in America, my goodness me, we want more. Not just people on the streets to show the numbers, but also non-cooperation with the system, so the system cannot operate. Because it needs us to do that. We must be learning lessons here, Alex, all the time. For instance, the power of mass non-cooperation. When in Egypt they say curfews, people in very large numbers refuse to do with that, and suddenly where's the power of the state? Understanding and starting to get as much as we can prepared for the fact, as we've seen in Egypt, that when the real revolution unfolds against a regime, one of the first things to go is not only truth, but actually the internet and mobile phone networks, so people can't communicate. And another thing we need to keep in our minds is no ideology. When we really trigger this true human revolution against these tyrannies or collective tyrannies, different faces or masks on the same face around the world, no ideology, equal freedom for everybody, no matter what their color, creed, religion, view, anything. Freedom must be our focus, not ideology and religious belief and all that stuff. We can argue about that or chat and debate about that. Let's keep our focus on what affects us all, and that's our basic freedoms being taken away. And so many people, they talk about wanting freedom, Alex, but they don't want freedom. To a large extent, they want to replace a tyranny they don't like with a tyranny they do, i.e. their belief system. These are the things that have to go, and we all must constantly keep our focus on what is the motivation of the protest and the uprising? Who's going to be and what kind of society is going to be in power when it's over? Who are these people coming in?
Well, we actually know. We know.
On our side and claiming to be behind it. You know, we need to really get streetwise and learn from what's happening around the world so we don't get caught.
Well, I agree with you. Now, we know that Mohammed El-Baradei is a big UN globalist, former head of the Atomic Energy Agency, U.S. trained. We know that he is for the inoculations. He is for the Planned Parenthood type stuff. He is a globalist. We know the Muslim Brotherhood, admittedly set up by British intelligence, is now menacing Saudi Arabia and others who we're not fans of. But the point is, the globalists want to have more radical regimes come in so that then Israel and others have an excuse to expand their land in the name of a security buffer zone. They're now moving out of the era of strong men and moving towards the strategy of tension. What do you, from your research, see as the next dominoes to fall?
Well, any of them could be really. The answer to that is who's next on the list, because it could be any of them. But the thing also about Israel, Alex, is if this uprising, so-called crisis, as it's being portrayed, a crisis for tyranny on one level, it continues to unfold, then it's going to be also an excuse for massive military support to, quote, protect Israel. And, of course, Israel's got one of the biggest armies in the world from this sliver of land in the north of the Arabian Peninsula, because of $3 billion a year in aid from the United States to Israel. And, of course, anything could happen if this really gets out of hand, in the sense that America could deploy forces to protect Israel as well as an excuse. Because, you know, one of the key things, Alex, and this is, I think, very relevant. Not necessarily it will happen tomorrow, but in this domino falling situation that we're now facing, one of the things that's come up again and again and again and again is that the Third World War, the third global conflict, the one that is to create, along with all the other things we're seeing, like finances and all the rest of it.
That's what Albert Pike called for.
Albert Pike, yeah, in his letter, exactly, the three world wars. And again, this also relates to what he said in terms of the Third World War. The common theme is that will be triggered in some way out of Israel and the Arab countries.
And by the way, in 1878, he laid out World War I, who it would be between, World War II, and then finally World War III. They would then destroy all the world religions out of the war and say we must have this new global one world government religion. I want you to get to that, but since you've mentioned it so much. So they're going after the key to the region, and they've been doing this doublespeak everywhere. We're for Mubarak, but we actually, that is the globalists, financed the ongoing attempt to overthrow him, because they know that will help Mubarak if they say they're funding the outsider. It will hurt him if they support him. And I've read all over the news where they're openly bragging. So they'll put out their general press releases for the profane general public, but then buried in there, talking to each other, they're bragging about what they're doing.
Yeah, they've got a song sheet, and this is not projected days in advance, weeks, months, or even years in advance. It's projected decades in advance.
Yeah, Brzezinski says 25 years in advance.
Yeah, and maybe more. I mean, you know, the basic theme of what's happening was outlined before the turn of the 20th century in terms of the themes of it all. And you know, I've quoted people in my books who've spoken over the years, like in the late 60s and stuff like that, insiders who said this is how the world's gonna be, and it's all unfolded as they said it would unfold, because it is a blueprint. And now we're seeing a real major card being played here, which is designed to trigger offshoot consequences in all directions, because this is the tinder box. This is the explosive point where they want to the next whole stage to explode out of.
Well, you heard him. He said it's the key. And then by running destabilization ops in all the other countries that aren't just allies of the globalists, they can create the crisis to offer the military and economic solution. But, David, how frustrating is it for you and for myself, and I want to get your view on this, to have the blueprint, to have the CFR, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, much of what they do public, admitting they would create a global currency crisis, they would end the dollar, bring in the banned car, SDR, $100 trillion, all now happening, but the yuppies have been put in their little comfort box and conditioned that none of this existed for decades, knowing that we have the documents. They preconditioned it didn't exist. So now that it even exists and has emerged, people have gone, some of them, into a catatonic state of denying it exists, even as it's announced.
Well, this is a major human trait in the programmed, manipulated human mind, which simply does not want to face what it doesn't want to believe is true. So when you are faced with something, you have a choice. You can literally face it and deal with it, and we could sort this if we did this in large enough numbers, or you can try to kid yourself that it doesn't exist, and therefore it's okay. You know, people say in situations where it's obvious that horrific things are going to be done in the very near future, and they're still saying, oh, no, they'd never do that. No, you want to persuade yourself they'd never do that, so you don't have to get your backside unglued from the sofa and do things you'd rather not have to do. And this is why we're at this point, Alex, and it's like, how much more confirmation do people want? How much more blatant does it have to be? Does it have to be the knock on the door? Does it have to be being taken away after the knock on the door? I mean, when are you going to draw a line here? But, you know, on another level, there's great encouraging things happening, because the number of people who are starting to see it are increasing all the time.
Well, two things are happening, David.
Just a quick point. They need to get streetwise, and I keep coming back to this because they must, and streetwise means get informed, because there are people who are protesting, like the Egyptians are protesting against Mubarak, like the students in London who are protesting against outrageous fees to put them in debt to the banks for the rest of their lives just to get educated. Same in other parts of the world. There are people on the streets because of the economic austerity programs in Greece and other places. But what those people need to understand is all those different subjects, all those different aspects, all those different events and situations that they are protesting about are masks on the same face.
Yes.
They need to take that step across the line and realize that it's all connected.
Yes,
and in the end, every different thing they're protesting about, all roads lead to the same cabal. And it's the cabal we must focus on, and the global agenda for the cabal, so that we challenge and expose and understand the picture rather than getting caught in just the pieces. So we see the forest instead of getting caught in the twigs. This is so important.